Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Fronteras, a Changing America. I'm Anthony Moreno. Our guest today is New Mexico State Auditor. In the past, Joseph Maestas has served as the Mayor of Española, a Santa Fe City Councilman, and a Public Regulation Commissioner. He joins us to talk about the issues his office is taking on. Auditor Maestas, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you for having me, Anthony. It's a pleasure to be here.
You're new in your role. I'd like to hear from you. What are your goals for your office as you take leadership here in your first few months?
Well, my goals are, to get in there and, get a handle on my personnel. I think the first priority was I have an executive team that I have the opportunity to appoint. And so that was priority number one. In fact, I started filling those slots soon after the general election to kind of have my executive team at the ready so they can kind of come in when I do on January 1. So getting my executive team together was one of my top priorities. The other was preparing for the legislative session. The way the process works when you have a change in statewide leadership, the outgoing statewide official submits a budget, and in my case, my predecessor submitted a budget and I had no input into it. And the legislative process doesn't lend itself for me to go back and have another bite at the apple and say, hey, wait, I differ in those budget priorities. So it was kind of a difficult transition to adjust to a budget that I inherited. So that was another priority. And then the other is, my agency is experiencing what many agencies are experiencing across the state, and that is a high vacancy rate. So I tell people my top three priorities are personnel, personnel, and personnel. So I'm really trying to attract folks to come work for the Office of the State Auditor. In fact, I just met about 2 hours ago with the business school and some of the accounting professors to see how I can collaborate with higher education to start filling that pipeline of students, undergraduate, graduate students, and try and stimulate interest in a career in public accounting and public auditing.
How big of a challenge do you think it is right now for folks trying to fill those roles in public accounting? I imagine there's a lot of competition.
A lot of competition. In fact, we're not competing with the private sector. My agency. I'd say our salaries lag about 30%. And one thing that we've seen is a decrease in the number of accounting firms that my office approves every year. Why do we approve these accounting firms? They need our approval because we regulate independent public accountants, or IPAs as we call them, to go out and contract with public entities all across New Mexico for financial audits. And we're talking about 1,000 public entities. Just over half are big enough to warrant a full financial audit. And then the others are your small public bodies, your acequias, your land grants, your mutual domestics, your soil and water and conservation associations. Those are the entities that need the most help, those small public bodies, because they don't have the resources, they don't have the technology, they don't have the continuity and leadership to be able to maintain financial compliance. And the real challenge is there's an executive order that the Martinez administration passed back in 2013. It's Executive Order 2013-006. What that executive order does is it basically says if you're a public entity and you're not financially compliant, you can't access your capital outlay. And so the Department of Finance and Administration basically looks at our information. For example, we have lists of public entities that we consider to be at risk because of a late audit report or an adverse or disclaimed opinion. And so Department of Finance and Administration enforces this executive order. And unfortunately, there's millions of dollars being withheld because these public entities are not financially compliant with my office.
Now, I want to get to the at-risk topic here in the report here in just a moment, but first I want to talk to you just about staffing and being able to meet these challenges. I mean, how big of a challenge is it right now for you in your office?
It's a big challenge. You know, I mentioned the high vacancy rate. I took over an agency that had almost a 40% vacancy rate. We've whittled that down to just under 30%, but we have critical vacancies in some of the high volume divisions that I manage. One is Financial Audit Division. That is the division that reviews all these annual financial audit reports. I'd say about 550 every year. They review firm profiles and determine whether or not they need to, recertify or approve a firm to continue to contract with public entities to do their audits. We also review the contracts. Every single audit contract that's signed across the state by a public entity comes through our office. So Financial Audit Division is kind of the engine of our office, but we have other I think aspects of the office that many people don't know about, Anthony. One is we have a Special Investigations Division, and what this division does is they basically handle all the incoming anonymous fraud, waste, and abuse complaints. We have various methods of intake: phone, direct email. We have an online process where you go to our website. Anyone out there can file an anonymous fraud, waste, and abuse complaint. We are bound by law to protect their confidentiality. And so we have Special Investigations Division that basically vets these anonymous fraud, waste, and abuse complaints, and then they determine whether or not they need to investigate it. They do more of a forensic accounting versus like financial audit accounting. And so they're certified fraud examiners. And we get about one complaint a day, and about half of those incoming complaints are actionable. And we have hotspots all over the state. Presently, we have about 250 active special investigations. So there seems to be an uptick in these complaints because I guess we're coming out of the pandemic. And so we have financial audit, we have special investigations, and then in 2021, my office was statutorily mandated to review conservatorship reports. Conservatorships submit these annual reports through the court system. We work with the court system to review these reports and determine whether or not we need to audit them. So that is in a snapshot kind of the basic functions of my office.
Now, you mentioned just being short-staffed, how that impacts municipalities, agencies, organizations from getting dollars that they may need with the capital outlay process. But what else is impacted when you don't have the resources to carry out the full mission of your organization? When you don't have those resources, what's impacted with oversight and transparency?
Well, it's so much. I mean, if you think about just the sheer volume of audit reports that we process, we basically have a performance metric that we have to review these audit reports within 30 days of receipt. And of course, that metric has been suffering over the past several years. It's very difficult for us to achieve that performance metric. But my staff is very thorough. We're small in number, but if we need to basically use resources of another division within the office, we'll do that. But oftentimes it's one constrained division asking another resource constrained division to help them, and sometimes it's vice versa. So we just rise to the challenge under these challenging circumstances.
That sounds like many folks throughout New Mexico
Exactly.
having to rise to challenges. We've heard that many times on this program and others. Where does New Mexico rank or compare with other states when it comes to resources and funding for the State Auditors Department?
Well, it's hard for me to say, but I think what I can tell you, being a regulator on the Public Regulation Commission and then kind of being the chief financial watchdog for the state of New Mexico is, it seems that all the regulatory agencies that are tasked statutorily with implementing these great laws, they're under-resourced. And I see that pattern throughout the state. And so I think that's something that we really need to look at, in that any law on the books is only as good as your ability to enforce it. And it's agencies like mine that's tasked with enforcing a lot of these laws.
Do you think that your office has enough power to really enforce some of the things that you're tasked with covering?
We have the authority, but not necessarily the resources. One bit of information about my office in terms of its authority is we have subpoena power. We can basically subpoena financial records. By statute, any public entity that's under audit has to open their books if I decide to visit, but we never resort to that. Our agents, the extensions of our office, are these pre-approved independent public accountants, and so they go out and do our work, basically. So they're agents of the Office of the State Auditor.
Your office recently released an updated at-risk list. Can you tell us about this list and just how many agencies, municipalities are really on it that might be concerning to folks?
Well, whenever you're late on your audit report, that is an audit finding. It doesn't matter if it's a day late, it's still late, and it's a finding. And we've seen an uptick in these public entities that are submitting their audits late. But I think what's compounding this situation is we're seeing a reduction in the total number of accounting firms that we certify every year. I'd say like maybe 5 years ago we had over 80, now we have just under 50. And so I think this should be alarming to everyone, in that you have fewer accounting firms doing more work, and sometimes the accounting firm could cause an audit report to be late because they have so much work. I hope that that doesn't happen predominantly, but I do hear some feedback that sometimes the auditing firm may be to blame for a late audit report. So we just released that. We had an adverse situation where Standard & Poor's issued a credit watch negative on the city of Santa Fe, and they want financial statements for fiscal year 21 in 30 days from that statement, and that statement was issued on March 13th. So here's an example of a city that's been chronically late for audits that could have their bond ratings withdrawn. Mm-hmm. And obviously, this is going to hurt future borrowing terms and bonding terms. It's certainly, not good.
I see. Now, with this report, there was a third component on the list that is a new report of financially non-compliant local public bodies. Can you tell us a little bit about this component?
Sure. What we call small public bodies, we oversee them, but they're so small, and small, I mean they have revenue under $500,000, so they're considered a small public body, and they're subject to a tiered approach of financial oversight depending on their revenue levels. Well, what we've been seeing over the years is these small public bodies have been digging a deeper hole. We have some of these small public bodies that haven't been compliant for 10 years. 10 years.
How does a body last that long and not get that type of oversight?
Well, I think my office had been providing these financial assistance grants to these small public bodies. It was an elective kind of application-based process, but the grants are made at about $2,000 a pop, so it's literally impossible for an accounting firm to go out to the hinterlands to audit an acequia district for a $2,000 engagement. And so we're changing all that because there's so many of these small public bodies that are not compliant. And there are some whose capital outlay is being withheld. Right now we've identified $6 million in capital outlay being withheld from a collection of these small public bodies that haven't been compliant. And so I'm going to be much more aggressive in assisting these small public bodies. We're going to do away with the elective application-based system of granting financial assistance grants. We're going to centralize the procurement. We're going to identify a cluster of priority small public bodies, particularly those that have capital outlay withheld, and we're going to oversee the procurement. So you aggregate kind of the work, so it stimulates interest on the part of the public accounting industry, and we accelerate the compliance of these small public bodies. And so the legislature was, I think, astute enough to grant us $500,000. That's a good down payment to try and make a dent and get these small public bodies compliant. In fact, and this is a new list that my office has provided on our website, and so it's good, I think, to help the small guy. You know, we can't let them fall in a greater degree of financial non-compliance. We need to step up and help them, especially if you think about all those small public bodies that were impacted by all the wildfires. They can get emergency federal funding, but they can't get regular federal funding. So it affects their capital outlay and non-emergency federal funding if they're not financially compliant.
We've talked about capital outlay a little bit, but I wanted to ask you, just because your job focuses on transparency so much, how transparent do you think our capital outlay process is in New Mexico?
You're going to get me in trouble, Anthony. Well, I think, you know, the way the legislature works, from my perspective, is, you know, there is the capital outlay bill. It's typically the junior bill. I think it's HB 2, and they kind of pass it with a placeholder. They pass it with a total amount, but not the specific projects. And both the Senate and the House are trying to work on this capital outlay, and they have to reconcile their lists to be under that authorized amount. I mean, it could be, you know, it could be more transparent, but I can tell you though that there's a lot of workings behind the scenes. You have House Appropriations. House Appropriations would appoint a subcommittee to look at some of these more difficult requests for expansion. And then on the Senate side, you have Senate Finance. They're dealing with the same thing. So, you know, it could be better. And I think the legislature's coming around. I think they realize the transparency challenge, and I think they're going to rise up to that challenge and be much more transparent when it comes to capital outlay.
Today, right now, this year, if I asked you how transparent our capital outlay process is, do you think most of it is figured out behind closed doors, away from the public?
Perhaps. But I think the greater issue with capital outlay is we have now over $3 billion in unspent capital outlay. And I think we're going about it wrong. I think we need to centralize technical assistance for these entities that don't have the assistance to plan and develop their projects and get them shovel ready. And when you parse out, you know, little bits of money that's really not enough to even complete a phase of a project is a problem. But there is that desire, and it's built into the system, where legislators need to deliver for their districts. And, you know, I think we have one of the highest budgets ever in the state's history. And so I don't think that the capital outlay awarding process is going to end or change in any way. I know that there's some efforts afoot to reform the capital outlay process, and I'd like to have that seat at the table. Being an engineer and
looking for solutions is what I think
Absolutely.
You're going to. But yeah. I'd like to follow up with that. If you did have that, you know, we're invited to have that seat at the table, what were some of the things you would tell lawmakers and those you know, involved in that conversation about how your office can make a difference if the resources are there?
Well, the way my office can directly make a difference is to accelerate the financial compliance of all those entities, not just the small ones, but the big ones. And once they're financially compliant, then they can get their awarded capital outlay. The irony here is that if I'm a financially non-compliant public entity and I come to you as my legislature and request capital outlay, and the legislature knows that I'm non-compliant, but he's going to award the money anyway. But the issue comes after the award, when that entity discovers, oops, I can't access it. And so it's kind of a clunky system, and I think that's adding to this accumulated balance of unobligated capital outlay. I mean, over $3 billion. I mean, that's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money, definitely. Now, I just have about 2.5 minutes left with
Okay.
you, but I want to talk with you about your big goals you have for this office that you would like to accomplish during your term.
Well, my overarching goal is to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse. My office has a training and education component, but it's collateral in nature, and I can't afford to take auditors offline to do training across the state. So I'm going to create a distinct training and education function. I may have to, maybe hire a consultant to assist with the logistics, but we are going to significantly expand our capacity to provide training and education to all these public entities to make sure that they stay in compliance. That's one of my priorities. My other priority is help these small public bodies become financially compliant.
There's still a lot of things that folks may be wondering when it comes to waste, fraud, abuse. For somebody who wants to report fraud, how does your office handle that situation? Is it easy for somebody to report that with your office?
It is. It is. In fact, if you go on the website, your identity is protected. The website basically automatically opens up a case, and once you provide the information, we take it from there. And if you look, I'll give you one example of a fraud, waste, and abuse complaint that came in through the Office of the State Auditor. This was not during my term, but it involved a cabinet secretary, and it led to the conviction of that cabinet secretary for criminal wrongdoing. So you can see that that a fraud, waste, and abuse complaint can really lead to action and justice.
Now, you mentioned that you're hiring for roles in your office. Why would somebody want to come and work in the office of the state auditor?
Well, we have definitely a variety. If you like financial auditing, you can work in our financial audit division. If you want to look into these conservatorships, which they're all different, I think that provides a lot of variety. And then I think the most fascinating is the Special Investigations Division, because the diversity and variety of incoming alleged complaints, it's incredible. And I hate to say it, Anthony, but we have just hot spots all over the state at all different levels of government.
We look forward to hopefully talking with you again soon about those. State Auditor Joseph Maestas, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate that.
We now introduce you to a local resource where our community can learn more about the history in our region. Our producer, Christian Valle, now takes us on a trip to the NMSU Archives and Special Collections, located within the Branson Library on the NMSU campus, for this Community Connection.
New Mexico State University Library Archives and Special Collections collects and preserves and then makes available to the public, to researchers, to NMSU students and faculty, historical documentation that illuminates the history of southern New Mexico, the U.S.-Mexico border region, and the Southwest in general, and of course the historical records of New Mexico State University. So the NMSU Library Archives and Special Collections is a treasure house of historical documentation about this region, about southern New Mexico and the U.S.-Mexico border region, where people, students, faculty, researchers, the general public can come in and learn about the rich history of this region. We have the Rio Grande Historical Collections, which are archival manuscripts and collections that relate to this region, southern New Mexico and the U.S.-Mexico border region. We also have the University Archives, which are the records of this institution going back to the founding of the college in 1888 by Hiram Hadley. And then we have special collections, which are published materials. These include things like rare books, out-of-print books. We have about 2 million photographs in the collection. We have about 5,000 hours of audio material, or mostly oral history interviews. We have thousands of historical maps of the region. Comprehensive collection of historical newspapers from the Mesilla Valley going back to the 1870s. Those include about 15 Spanish language titles that were published in the late 19th and early 20th century. We have a complete run of several Las Cruces newspapers, including the Las Cruces Sun News and the earlier Las Cruces Citizen. We have a very friendly staff here in the Archives and Special Collections who are eager to help all of the researchers who come through our doors.
I see the archives being more interactive, having exhibits that are more interactive. I also see a lot more digital content being available. I see us being here for hundreds of more years, because the archives are always going to be a need for people to do research and for people to find out more about the past. There's a lot of information that's on our website, and people do not need to make an appointment to come visit us. They can come, they can call ahead and we can find materials for them to use, or they can send us an email at our archives@nmsu.edu. We are open to the public. We love having the public here. We are a land-grant institution. We serve farmers, we serve students, we serve business people. We're happy to have everyone come visit the archives.
The vast majority of the materials we have in our collection, particularly the archival materials, come to us as donations from the community. It's very important to us to have a collection that is inclusive of the entire community. We have information on our website about our hours and our location, how to come in and find us, questions to ask us before you come in.
That's it for our program this week. Keep updated anytime with the news at krwg.org. Thank you for joining us. I'm Anthony Moreno. We'll see you next time.